The library was cloaked in the muted glow of late afternoon, the kind of light that seemed to cling to the dust motes drifting lazily above the rows of ancient books. Thomas Graves sat hunched over a worn wooden table, the surface scarred with decades of use and neglect. Here, he was surrounded by the town's collective memory, a fragile archive of faded photographs, brittle newspapers, and handwritten journals that smelled of mildew and time. Evelyn Marsh leaned close, her voice a cautious whisper that barely disturbed the heavy silence. "You must understand," she said, adjusting her glasses with a trembling hand, "this hotel isn't just a building, it's something else, something between." She paused, eyes flickering nervously toward the window, where the mist was beginning to roll in from the sea. Between life and death, between what we remember and what slips away. Thomas's gaze shifted back to the photographs spread before him. Each one showed the hotel, its faded silhouette looming at the horizon behind smiling faces frozen in time, the last images of those who vanished without a trace. He traced a finger along the edges of one particularly aged print, noting the peculiar blurring around the hotel's outline, as if it were both there and not there. "Look here," he murmured, pointing to the photo. "See how the edges shimmer? It's like the hotel is bleeding through the veil of reality itself." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That shimmer, it's what the old stories tried to describe. A place caught in a liminal state, a crossing point where the living and the lost meet. The hotel traps them there, caught in memories and despair." The words sent a chill coursing down Thomas's spine. He had expected skepticism or dismissal, but here was confirmation, cryptic though it was, that the hotel held a supernatural significance. Yet doubt gnawed at him just as fiercely as his growing obsession. The next day brought a confrontation he could not avoid. Detective Mark Halstead's office was a stark contrast to the library's fading grandeur. The walls were bare, save for a few wanted posters and a calendar pinned with hastily scribbled notes. Halstead himself sat behind a cluttered desk, arms crossed, expression tight with skepticism. "Graves," he said, voice blunt, "I respect your work, but chasing ghosts won't solve these disappearances. You've got no proof that this hotel is anything more than an abandoned ruin." Thomas met the detective's gaze steadily. "I don't expect you to believe until you see it for yourself. But the photographs, they aren't just coincidences. There's something about the hotel, something that defies explanation." Halstead shook his head. "People go missing for all sorts of reasons. Drugs, running away, foul play. You getting lost in nostalgia and superstition." The tension in the room was palpable, a collision of rationality and the inexplicable. Thomas left the station with a heightened resolve, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Back in his hotel room that evening, the growing obsession consumed him. He spread the photographs across the creaking wooden floor, their glossy surfaces catching the weak light of the street lamp outside. As shadows flickered and danced across the images, Thomas noticed subtle distortions, faint halos, impossible reflections, and ghostly figures lurking just beyond the frame's edge. He leaned closer, heart pounding. "It's not just a building," he whispered to himself. "It's a doorway." Days later, under the twilight sky in the town square, Thomas sat beside Evelyn beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient oak. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the salt-scented breath of the sea. Evelyn's eyes held a melancholic weight as she spoke of the hotel's dark legacy. "My family has lived here for generations," she confided. "We've seen the disappearances and heard the stories passed down in hushed tones. The hotel is a place where time folds, where memories become prisons. It's no ordinary curse, it's the weight of loss made manifest." Thomas felt the crushing gravity of her words, the oppressive sorrow that clung to the town like the ever-present mist. Here, at this crossroads of memory and reality, he realized the true danger he faced. The hotel was not merely a backdrop to tragedy, but the very heart of it, a spectral nexus that threatened to consume him as it had so many before. Yet, despite the warnings and the skepticism, Thomas's resolve hardened. The photographs, the whispers, the shifting shadows, they all pointed to a truth he could no longer ignore. As darkness settled over the town, Thomas sat alone in his room. The images of the lost souls spread like a mosaic of despair around him. Somewhere beyond the veil of night, the hotel waited, timeless and patient, its haunted gaze fixed upon him. What awaited him at the threshold was uncertain. But Thomas knew one thing with absolute clarity: to understand the hotel was to confront the very essence of memory and loss, and to do so, he must walk willingly into the shadows. Thomas Graves hesitated at the threshold of the hotel at the end of the photograph, his breath visible in the cold morning air that mingled with the salty tang of the sea. The building loomed before him, a vast silhouette against the creeping mist, its once grand facade, now a crumbling monument to forgotten times. The windows stared blankly like empty eye sockets, darkened and hollow, while the warped front door sagged on rusted hinges, groaning softly as if warning him away. Yet, despite the instinctual urge to turn back, Thomas stepped forward. His fingers brushed the peeling paint, rough and brittle beneath his touch, before grasping the heavy iron handle. As the door swung open, a chilling breath issued forth, a misty cascade that curled around his feet and clung to his clothes. The stale, oppressive air within smelled of damp wood, salt, and an undercurrent of something far older, something decayed not just in body but in spirit. Inside, the hotel swallowed him whole. The grand lobby, once a place of lively gatherings and laughter, now echoed with an eerie silence that pressed upon his ears like a physical weight. The wallpaper hung in tatters, faded floral patterns barely discernible beneath layers of grime. Furniture lay scattered and broken, and the once polished floorboards creaked and moaned beneath his tentative steps. But it was not merely the physical decay that unsettled Thomas. As he ventured deeper, the very walls seemed to breathe and shift, their outlines wavering as though the building existed in some liminal space between worlds. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, flickering and retreating whenever he tried to focus on them. Soft whispers curled through the air, indistinct murmurs that brushed against the edges of his consciousness, but always slipped away before he could catch their words. The hotel was alive, and it was watching. Thomas's pulse quickened as he made his way down a long, narrow corridor. The flickering light of his battered flashlight barely penetrated the oppressive gloom. Doors on either side stood half open, revealing glimpses of rooms frozen in time, cracked mirrors, decayed upholstery, and walls smeared with the shadows of long-forgotten grief. Then, in the dim glow, figures began to emerge, at first mere wisps of light and shadow flitting in the periphery. But as Thomas pressed onward, the shapes coalesced into ghostly forms, lost souls trapped within the hotel's spectral domain. Their faces were blurred, their eyes hollow wells of sorrow and longing. They moved in slow, repetitive loops, caught in endless cycles of memory and pain. One such figure drifted near, a woman in a faded dress, her translucent hand reaching out as if yearning for something just beyond reach. Thomas stretched out his own hand, desperate to touch her, to offer solace, but his fingers passed through her like smoke. She turned, eyes meeting his briefly, filled with a silent plea that pierced his heart before she faded into the shadows. The oppressive atmosphere thickened, and time itself seemed to fracture. Clocks mounted on peeling walls spun erratically, their hands whirling in impossible patterns. The air shimmered, and Thomas found himself momentarily transported faces and places from his own past bleeding into the present. The room around him twisted and contorted, shifting between memories and spectral visions in an unsettling dance. A sudden chill ran down his spine as he confronted a vision of his lost friend, the one whose disappearance had first drawn him here. The friend's face, pale and haunted, flickered like a broken film reel before dissolving into the mist. Thomas's breath caught, and for a moment his own reality wavered. Clenching his fists against the rising tide of terror and disorientation, Thomas forced himself to move forward. Each step deeper into the hotel's heart was a step deeper into the curse's grasp. The building was a prison of memories, a liminal space where time folded back upon itself and despair fed the malevolent force within. Yet, amidst the swirling shadows and haunting whispers, Thomas sensed a fragile thread of hope, a path to understanding the curse and perhaps breaking it. The hotel's secrets were laid bare in its shifting corridors and spectral inhabitants. To escape, he would need to confront not only the entity that bound the hotel, but also the ghosts of his own past. As he paused in a vast, decaying ballroom, the echoes of a long-forgotten waltz whispered in the air. The walls seemed to pulse with memories, and the mist thickened around him, enveloping Thomas in a cold embrace. The hotel's true nature revealed itself in that moment. It was less a building and more a manifestation of loss, nostalgia, and despair, feeding on the souls it ensnared. Thomas swallowed hard, steeling himself for the trials ahead. The line between the living and the dead was thinner here than anywhere else he had known. To save himself and those lost within, he would have to navigate the shifting nightmare, face his deepest fears, and unravel the curse's tangled threads. With a final glance at the spectral figures drifting aimlessly through the dim corridors, Thomas stepped forward into the mist, deeper into the hotel at the end of the photograph. The door groaned shut behind him, sealing his passage and marking the beginning of a journey from which there might be no return. The air grew heavier as Thomas crossed the threshold into the heart of the hotel, a place where light seemed to bend and shadows whispered secrets long buried. The warped wooden floorboards groaned beneath his feet, every echo swallowed by the suffocating silence that prevailed. A chill seeped into his bones, not from any draught but from the palpable weight of sorrow that clung to the walls like a second skin. Faintly, through the gloom, he caught the shimmer of movement, ghostly figures flickering at the edge of his vision. As if reluctant to be seen but unable to resist the pull of his gaze. Faces, pale and blurred, revealed glimpses of lives interrupted, a woman clutching a child, a man frozen mid-step, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and despair. These were the lost souls trapped between worlds, prisoners of a curse that fed on their lingering nostalgia. Thomas' breath came shallow and quick as he ventured deeper, the hotel twisting around him in impossible ways. Corridors looped back upon themselves. Doors opened to rooms that blurred into memories both his own and those of the vanished. The line between past and present thinned until it vanished entirely, leaving him suspended in a liminal space where time was fractured and fluid. At the core of this spectral labyrinth, the malevolent entity awaited, an intangible force radiating despair so intense it threatened to crush him. It spoke not in words but in emotions, flooding his mind with visions of loss and longing. He saw the original owner of the hotel, consumed by grief so profound it birthed the curse, binding every soul who ever gazed upon the hotel's faded facade in a prison of memory. Thomas felt the entity's pull, an irresistible urge to surrender and become yet another faded shadow within the hotel's walls. But within his pocket, the worn photograph of his lost friend seemed to pulse with a faint light, a beacon anchoring him to his resolve. Clutching it tightly, he forced himself to see beyond the despair, to remember not just the pain, but the will to fight. The hotel trembled around him, its ghostly halls whispering tales of sorrow and regret, but Thomas' determination blazed brighter than the shadows. He knew the path forward was perilous, fraught with illusions designed to break his spirit. Yet in that moment, amidst the swirling mists of memory and nightmare, he faced the hotel's true face, not just a building, but a living prison of souls, a manifestation of loss itself. As the chapter closed, the spectral walls seemed to pulse with a new energy, the contest between Thomas' hope and the entity's despair poised to escalate. Outside, the mist thickened, concealing the hotel's secrets as the past and present converged into an inevitable confrontation. The air inside the hotel was thick and unyielding, pressing down on Thomas' graves like a physical weight. As he took cautious steps down the dim corridor, The once familiar surroundings warped subtly, walls seeming to breathe with a slow, agonizing rhythm. The peeling wallpaper, mottled and stained by decades of neglect, seemed to ripple faintly under his gaze, as if the fabric of the hotel itself was alive and watching. Whispers fluttered just beyond the edge of hearing, indistinct murmurs that teased the edge of comprehension, laced with sadness and menace. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by the soft scuff of his worn boots on the warped wooden floor. His fingers brushed frigid plaster, chilled beyond the coastal dampness outside. Each step felt like a descent deeper into a nightmare woven from memory and despair. Suddenly, the corridor around him blurred and shimmered, and the shadows lengthened and twisted, stretching into grotesque shapes that writhed at the periphery of his vision. A cold dread gripped his chest as the boundary between the tangible and the spectral thinned to a fragile membrane. He could almost taste the bitterness of forgotten sorrows and long-lost regrets. Then, as if pulled by unseen hands, Thomas found himself standing not in the derelict hotel but in a sunlit park. The scent of freshly cut grass and the warmth of sunlight on his face momentarily disoriented him. In the distance, a figure emerged, a smiling boy with dark hair, laughter bubbling from his lips. Recognition struck Thomas like a blow. It was his lost friend, the one whose disappearance had set him on this path. For a brief, aching moment, the cruel grip of time slackened, and Thomas reached for the apparition. But the light shifted. The boy's smile warped into a grimace, laughter twisted into a hollow, echoing moan. His form distorted, elongating and darkening until hollow eyes, black as voids, fixed on Thomas with a hunger that chilled him to his core. The warmth bled away, replaced by a suffocating cold that seeped into Thomas's bones. He staggered back, heart hammering, the illusion shattering like glass. Before he could gather himself, the scene morphed again. Now he stood within the confines of his childhood home, though it was a twisted caricature of memory. The walls flickered, one moment painted in soft pastel hues, the next cracked and bleeding shadows. The scent of old pine floorboards mixed with the metallic tang of something long decayed. Voices overlapped his mother's gentle calls, laughter from a forgotten summer, the sharp reprimand of a scolding teacher, all merging into a cacophony that threatened to drown him. Objects shifted shape under his gaze. A favorite toy would suddenly dissolve into a writhing mass of tendrils, a family photograph melting into a smear of indistinct faces. The familiar was alien, the comforting turned sinister. He gripped the edge of a warped table to steady himself, fighting the dizziness and rising panic. The hotel's curse was not merely a prison of souls, it was a labyrinth of fractured memories, a snare that ensnared the mind as surely as the body. In the midst of this chaos, a mirror appeared. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not Thomas's wary, unshaven face but a shifting, terrible mosaic of lost souls. Their eyes were windows to endless sorrow, their mouths parted in silent screams and whispered cautions. The mirror seemed to pulse with dark energy, beckoning him to join the eternal chorus of the damned. Thomas felt himself trembling, the weight of despair pressing on him like a physical force. Yet, within the depths of that torment, a flicker of defiance sparked. He was not yet lost. The memories that haunted him, the grief for his vanished friend, the echoes of his own past were also his strength. To surrender would mean becoming another faded shadow, trapped forever in the hotel's cursed grasp. Gritting his teeth, Thomas forced himself to look away from the mirror. The illusions around him began to waver as his resolve hardened. He whispered to himself, a determination rising from the depths of his soul. He would confront the darkness, break the cycle, and reclaim the lost. The hotel might twist time and memory, but it could not yet claim him. As the spectral visions faded, the corridor returned. The wallpaper stopped pulsating, the whispers retreated into silence. Thomas exhaled slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the cold. The hotel had tested him, drawn out his deepest fears and grief, but it had also shown him the price of surrender. He stepped forward, the echo of his boots a steady rhythm in the haunted silence. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, but Thomas Graves was no longer merely a seeker of truth. He was a man prepared to face the darkest reflections of his soul to escape the hotel's clutches. And as he moved deeper into the building's shifting heart, a faint glimmer of hope flickered in the gathering shadows, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the wind stirred the dead leaves by the shoreline, carrying with it the faintest echo of a whispered name, lost to time but not forgotten. Thomas's journey was far from over, and the haunted reflections within the hotel promised more trials before dawn. With a final glance at the fading corridor behind him, Thomas pressed onward, the line between memory and nightmare blurring but never breaking. The hotel waited, patient and eternal, its story entwined with his own. And somewhere beyond the veil of shadow, the lost watched and waited too. The chill in the air grew heavier as Thomas stepped deeper into the heart of the hotel, the shifting walls around him breathing with a life of their own. The dim, spectral glow cast ghostly shadows that writhed and twisted, as if the very building sought to disorient and trap him forever within its labyrinthine depths. His fingers clenched tight around his camera, the only tangible link to the world beyond this nightmare. Each step was a battle fought against the creeping dread that clawed at his mind, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of his sanity. A low murmur filled the corridor, whispers from the lost souls whose fates had been sealed here. They were echoes of sorrow, fragments of memories suspended in the thick mist that clung to every surface. Thomas's heart pounded fiercely. He knew that to survive, he would have to confront the source of this despair head-on. The curse was more than a mere haunting, it was a living, consuming force, feeding on nostalgia and grief, binding victims in eternal limbo. Navigating the twisting passageways, Thomas arrived at a vast chamber where time itself seemed to fracture. The walls shimmered with flickering images, faces blurred by years, some anguished, others resigned, all trapped in endless loops of their final moments. Thomas reached out, desperation flooding his veins as he tried to touch one apparition. The ghostly figure dissolved like mist, leaving behind a lingering ache of loss. "You must face it," a voice echoed in his mind as if the building itself whispered counsel. "Confront the source to break free." Summoning every ounce of courage, Thomas pressed forward until he stood before a shadowy entity, a swirling mass of darkness and sorrow that radiated the crushing weight of decades-old despair. It was the embodiment of the original owner's grief, twisted into a malevolent presence that had cursed the hotel and ensnared countless souls. The temperature dropped and shadows stretched like claws toward him. Thomas' breath came in ragged bursts, his body trembling, yet his resolve did not waver. He spoke aloud, his voice steady despite the terror gripping him. "I know your pain, but this suffering ends now. Release them. Release me." The darkness recoiled, and for a moment, the oppressive weight lifted. Light fractured through the gloom, illuminating the faces of the lost souls as they began to soften, their anguish easing. One by one, they drifted away, dissolving into the ether with a whispered farewell. Thomas staggered, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. His body ached, and his mind reeled from the ordeal, but the oppressive grip of the hotel began to loosen. He was still trapped within this liminal space, yet a fragile hope flickered within him, a hope that the cycle could be broken. As the chamber's light dimmed, the hotel seemed to sigh, a final breath of resignation or perhaps a warning that this victory was but a beginning. Thomas knew the path ahead remained perilous, but for the first time he believed escape was possible. Clutching his camera, he prepared for the trials yet to come, determined to end the curse that had stolen so many lives, including the friend he had lost years before. Outside, the sea crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, indifferent to the struggles within the shadowed hotel. But inside, a silent battle had been waged, and for now, Thomas had broken the cycle.